Hello there. Yes, I'm aware it's taken me ages to get around to doing this video because there's been so much happening, but I'm finally here and able to sit in front of you all and go over another rebuttal of the latest JW broadcasting episode. Now yes, you'll notice my hair's a little bit different. I had it cut yesterday. It's not quite how I wanted it, but at least it's out of my eyes, so I won't have to constantly be messing around with it while I'm talking to you. Right, okay, so the latest JW broadcasting episode, we're talking about the September edition, was fascinating because it dealt with the overlapping generation teaching, which I just find amazing, because the overlapping generation teaching is one of the things that Watchtower needs to avoid completely. It needs to not talk about that because it's so nonsensical. But instead they decide to tackle it head on, which again for me is evidence that they are genuinely deluded and believe sincerely that what they have is the truth, because otherwise, as I say, they'd be more cynical. They'd avoid talking about things like this that don't make any sense. But because they believe they have the truth, they aren't ashamed about it, or at least they're not ashamed of talking about it in front of fellow believers. Anyway, I'm blabbering and we need to get on with the first clip.
Well, hello. We're so happy that you could be with us for another edition of JW Broadcasting.
Thank you, it's a pleasure to be here.
My friend Bob Serenko's here. He's going to be the co-host for this program.
Hi, Bob.
Bob, why don't you tell the folks what's in store?
Thank you, David. We have some exciting things to look forward to on this program.
This is the September program of JW Broadcasting, and you are welcome.
I am welcome. A governing body member says that I am welcome to be watching the JW broadcasting episode. I will happily take that. That's very, very accommodating of you, David. I do just want to say something about David Splane co-hosting on this episode. It hasn't escaped my attention that David is among a number of governing body members who for some reason don't feel comfortable just hosting on by themselves. Mark Sanderson feels comfortable, Tony Morris feels comfortable, Stephen Lett feels comfortable hosting the show by themselves, but for some reason David Splane doesn't, and I just find it very interesting because in my opinion David Splane is probably the best. Yeah, he's among the best governing body members when it comes to how persuasive he is when he's talking. He has a manner about him that's very compelling, that is quite well suited to these episodes, and yet for some reason, whether he just doesn't feel confident or he's not happy with the format, but he feels he needs to, have a co-host there as like a comfort blanket. And another thing I've noticed, which I'll talk about later in this rebuttal, is that David Splane doesn't like the auto cue. I think he does use it perhaps occasionally, but there are moments, which you'll see later, where rather than using the auto cue, he insists on reading the notes that are in front of him, which I think is quite telling. I think that he's kind of noticing that the auto cue aspect of the JW broadcasting format detracts from it, and he's like, nope, I'm going to read from my notes.
This month, I'd like to discuss how our understanding of this generation that Jesus spoke about at Matthew 24:34 has a bearing on the nearness of the time of the end of this system of things.
So this gives us some insight into why David Splane has picked up the poison chalice of talking about the generation teaching. Now, for those of you who don't know about the generation teaching, it's been a mainstay of Watchtower literature going back many decades. And basically it's all to do with the scripture that says that Armageddon will not come about unless certain events happen that Jesus describes, and that a certain generation of his followers will be around to see not just these events happening, but also the Great Tribulation. So in other words, a certain generation of followers has to be alive from the start of the last days to when they eventuate in the Great Tribulation. And for decades, Watchtower literature has said this has to be the generation that was not just alive in 1914, but aware of what was going on in 1914. And an interesting thing not everyone will be aware of, if I find the reasoning book. This is called Reasoning from the Scriptures. It was published in 1989. No, sorry, 1985, but this is the 1989 edition. And at the moment of making this video, things are changing all the time with Jehovah's Witnesses, but at the moment of making this video, this is still in use by Jehovah's Witnesses all over the world, and a good Jehovah's Witness who's doing what they're told will have a copy of these in their literature bags when they come to your door, or when you approach them in the street. Now, the fascinating thing about this book is it contains information that Jehovah's Witnesses no longer believe. So if I turn to page 200, quite an easy number to remember, page 200, you'll see that there is a list of features, and on point number 8 it talks about last days, and I'm just going to read it to you. It says, they believe, that's Jehovah's Witnesses, that we are living now since 1914 in the last days of this wicked system of things, that some who saw the events of 1914 will also see the complete destruction of the present wicked world. So that is old light. Jehovah's Witnesses no longer believe that, but it's still in their reasoning book, which they carry to your door. So yes, Jehovah's Witnesses are visiting you with an apostate publication in their literature bags. But that was the old understanding. But obviously what happened was, a lot of years rolled by from when that book was printed, and it became obvious that it was just impossible, physically impossible for people, enough people to be around who were not just alive in 1914, but who were interpreting the start of World War I as being significant in Bible prophecy. It was just impossible for that to be the case. So they changed it, and there were a number of changes, but where we are as of now is the overlapping generation teaching, which we'll go into. But the reason why David Splane wants to talk about it, going back to what I started with, is because it all ties into two key factors. One, the doomsday message of Jehovah's Witnesses. In other words, they want you to listen to what they have to say because the world is ending and we're all going to die unless we do exactly what they tell us to do. And the second reason why it's important is because the 1914 teaching, into which the generation teaching is woven quite strongly, the 1914 teaching essentially props up the entire mandate of the organization, because from 1914 you get 1919 according to their understanding of scripture, and it was between 1914 and 1919 that Jesus Christ chose the Watchtower organization. So this is why it's important. This is why David Splane wants to talk about it, but I still think he's extremely mistaken picking up on something that is so outrageous, so nonsensical, instead of just talking about more generic feel-good stories, as other governing bodies have shown is a good technique.
You'll remember what Jesus said as recorded at Matthew 24:34. He said, "This generation will by no means pass away until all these things happen." Now you'll notice that there are two elements in this verse. We talk about this generation, so we need to know what that's about. And also, what are all these things that are going to happen?
So this is interesting. Hopefully, with the help of my little captions, you noticed a few clever things that were going on there. First of all, David Splane quotes the scripture, and you'll notice that when the scripture in Matthew is cited, it doesn't mention generations in the plural, it mentions generation in the singular. And straight away you can see he's saying, well, we need to define what the word generation means. No, we don't. Everyone knows what the word generation means. All you need to do is pick up a dictionary. But what he is asking his listeners to do, or his viewers to do, is to suspend what they already know about the meaning of the word generation and adopt his revised definition of what a generation is. And as the video goes on, you'll see that he basically switches the word generation for contemporary. So, and I'll show you more about what I mean later, but for now, let's just see what else David's got to say.
Well, let's take the second point first. What are all these things that Jesus was referring to? Well, if you look in the context of Matthew chapter 24, you see that Jesus talks about nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, food shortages, earthquakes in one place after another. Fine. So the generation that Jesus is talking about will not pass away until it sees war, famine, earthquakes. But is there more? There's more. In the same chapter, Jesus talks about a great tribulation. So the generation will not pass away until the great tribulation occurs. Now that is interesting. That is relevant to us. But of course we have to know what is a generation and which particular generation was Jesus talking about. Now, if you were asked by someone to identify a scripture that tells us what a generation is, what scripture would you turn to? I'll give you a moment. Think about that.
No, I really don't need to know what generation means. I have a dictionary.
My choice is Exodus chapter 1 and verse 6. Let's read that. Exodus chapter 1 and verse 6. It says, Joseph eventually died, and also all his brothers, and all that generation. Now, what do we know about Joseph's family? We know that Joseph had 11 brothers. 10 of them were older than Joseph. One of them, Benjamin, was younger. And we know that at least 2 of Joseph's brothers actually lived longer than Joseph, because the Bible says that on his deathbed he called his brothers, plural, to him.
Yes, brothers can be different ages and will often be born and die at different times. Hopefully you already knew this, but David wants to remind us.
But now, what did Joseph and his brothers all have in common? They were all contemporaries. They had all lived at the same time. They were part of the same generation.
So hopefully you've noticed this. The magician's trick that's being played. David wants you to equate the word contemporary with the word generation. They're 2 completely different words, but David will soon start using them interchangeably, and he wants you to think of them as meaning the same thing.
Now, suppose there was a man who died 10 minutes before Joseph was born. Would he be part of Joseph's generation? No. Because he'd never lived at the same time as Joseph, he was not a contemporary of Joseph's. Now suppose there was a little baby who was born 10 minutes after Joseph died. Would the baby be part of Joseph's generation? Again, no, because the baby would not have lived at the same time as Joseph. For the man and the baby to be part of Joseph's generation, they would have had to have lived at least some time during Joseph's lifespan.
Again, David is trying to get us to buy into this idea that contemporary and generation are interchangeable. Here's my old dictionary that I used to take with me to school, and I've just dug it out to read. It's the Oxford Mini Dictionary, circa 1990. Circa 1988, so there you go. And here it says generation, all persons born at about the same time. That to me is what I think of when I think of the word generation. A generation of people who are alive at around the same time in history. But David wants you to equate generation with the word contemporary. So as long as there is some kind of overlapping going on, hey, the generation can be expanded.
So now we've discovered what it means to have a generation. What makes up a generation? It's a group of contemporaries. It's a group of people who have lived at the same time. But now Jesus said, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things happen. So what particular generation was Jesus referring to? For that, we have to go to the context of Jesus' words. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 24, and we're going to read verses 32 to 34. Jesus says, "Now learn this illustration from the fig tree. Just as soon as its young branch grows tender and sprouts its leaves, you know that summer is near. Likewise, also you, when you see all these things, know that he is near at the doors. Truly I say to you, that this generation will by no means pass away until all these things happen." Now let's go back to verse 32. Notice that Jesus is saying that his disciples should learn something from the fig tree. Now any little boy, any small child can see a leaf on a tree and point to it and say, "Look, leaf." But what does it mean? The child may not know that summer is near, but an older person who sees the leaves on the trees is going to say, I know that something that can't be seen yet is going to happen. Summer is going to come. Now you can't see it yet, but the older person knows that summer is near. And then in verse 33, Jesus starts out by saying, "Likewise." So he's making a connection, isn't he, between verse 33 and verse 32. He says, "Likewise also you, when you see all these things, know that he is near at the doors." Now what does Jesus mean by all these things? Well, the things he talked about earlier in the chapter. Nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, food shortages, earthquakes, pestilences, and so on. He says, when you see all these things, I want you to draw a conclusion about something spiritual. Now, when did all these things begin to appear? In 1914. Now, in 1914, any young boy could see the various aspects of the sign, wars, famines, earthquakes, and so on, and conclude that they were bad. But what did it all mean?
It's worth just interjecting here and noticing what David Splane has just done. He's basically insulted everybody who is not a Jehovah's Witness. So he's basically reading way too much into the illustration that Jesus gave of the fig tree. Jesus, according to the Bible, says, well, just like when you see leaves on a fig tree, summer's near, when you see these signs, you'll know, blah, blah, blah. David goes one step further and introduces this idea of a child who looks at a tree and goes leaf and doesn't associate it with the changing of the seasons. And he's basically saying that anybody alive in history at any moment whose interpretation of events doesn't correspond with Watchtower is like a child, is ignorant, is stupid. Unless you reach the same conclusions about world history and Bible prophecy as the Bible students or Watchtower or the governing body reach, then you're just a child, you're ignorant. What do you know? And I just thought it was worth raising that, because hopefully there are some non-JWs or people who've never been JWs watching this video. You've just been insulted, you've just been likened to a child simply for not agreeing or for not having views that correspond perfectly with those of the governing body.
Only those with spiritual discernment would draw the conclusion, as Jesus said, that he is near at the doors. Now here's the point. In 1914, who were the only ones who saw these various aspects of the sign and drew the right conclusion that something invisible was occurring? Only the anointed. So, this generation is made up of anointed ones who see the sign and have the spiritual discernment to draw the proper conclusion about the sign.
So again, we need to interject here, because David Splane is trying to impress upon us that a group of people who were alive in 1914 were accurately interpreting events. They knew what was happening, or they knew what was going to happen. And he uses some very clever word choices here. He says they knew that something invisible was happening. So, in other words, they were wrong about what would happen, but so long as they assumed something invisible was going to happen, then that meant that they were right. Didn't matter exactly, sorry, there's a fly buzzing around. Didn't matter exactly what it was that they were right about, but so long as they assumed something invisible was going to happen, you know, you've aced your test. Now, this is the book Faith on the March. It was published in 1950s. Let me get you the exact year. 1957. And lots of witnesses have a copy of this, because for a while you could order it at the Kingdom Halls. But there's an interesting story here that highlights the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses had very specific expectations for 1914. They basically believed that Armageddon would begin in 1914, and that just before Armageddon came, all of the Bible students, who at that time were universally thought of as being spirit appointed, they would all basically go up to heaven. They would essentially be raptured, I think is the way you would describe it. And on page 47, just to put you in the picture as to what they were expecting, let me read to you from what A.H. Macmillan says. On August 23rd, 1914, as I well recall, Pastor Russell started on a trip to the northwest, down to the Pacific coast and over into the southern states, and then ending at Saratoga Springs, New York, where we held a convention September 27th to the 30th. At that Saratoga Springs convention, quite a number were in attendance. I was invited to talk on the subject, "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore let us be sober, watchful, and pray." Well, as one would say, that was down my road. I believed it myself, sincerely, that the church was going home in October 1914. During that discourse, I made this unfortunate remark: "This is probably the last public address I shall ever deliver, because we shall all be going home soon." Next morning, October 1st, about 500 of us began the return trip to Brooklyn, including a lovely ride on the Hudson River Day Line steamer from Albany to New York. Sunday morning, we were to open services in Brooklyn, this to conclude our convention. Quite a number of the conventioners stayed at Bethel, the home of the headquarters staff members. Friday morning, October 2nd, we all were seated at the breakfast table when Russell came down. As he entered the room, he hesitated a moment, as was his custom, and said cheerily, "Good morning, all." But this morning, instead of proceeding to his seat as usual, he briskly clapped his hands and happily announced, "The Gentile times have ended, their kings have had their day." We all applauded. We were highly excited, and I would not have been surprised if at that moment we had just started up, that becoming the signal to begin ascending heavenward. But of course there was nothing like that really. Russell took his seat at the head of the table and made a few remarks, and then I came in for some good-natured twitting. He said, "We are going to make some changes in the programme for Sunday. At 10:30 Sunday morning, Brother Macmillan will give us an address." Everybody laughed heartily, recalling what I said on Wednesday at Saratoga Springs, my last public address. So those were the sorts of expectations that Bible students, the forerunners of Jehovah's Witnesses, had in 1914. They were completely wrong. They were wrong about what would happen in 1914. But David Splane is trying to get us to buy into this idea that because they assumed something was happening invisibly, then that was good enough. Well, I would submit that it wasn't good enough. You're either right about what's happening or wrong about what's happening. And when you examine early Bible student literature, as I'm going to be doing in more detail in future videos, it becomes painfully obvious that Bible students around 1914 were anticipating the end of the world. They were anticipating Armageddon and a change on the planet into rulership under Christ. That's what they were expecting. They got it wrong. And for every decade since then, the Watchtower Society has been flailing around with different ideas as to how they could have been right all along. But they were either right or they were wrong, and I'm afraid to say they were wrong. But look out for A.H. Macmillan, who I've just quoted, because he will make a brief cameo in the next few clips.
Now, one of those who saw the sign and understood what it meant was Brother Frederick Franz. And Brother Franz was born in 1893, and he was baptized in November of 1913. So, as one of the Lord's anointed in 1914, he saw the sign, and he was able to understand its meaning.
I just think it's worth pausing for a moment here to talk about what's just been presented to us. We're given this example of Fred Franz, who is basically held aloft because his birth dates and his death date are quite convenient for Watchtower to make a point about the overlapping generation, as we'll see later. But we're told here that Fred Franz was born in 1893 and that he was baptized in 1913, which obviously was a year before 1914. So Fred Franz was 20 when he was baptized. And what you are being asked to believe is that a 20-year-old Fred Franz was able to not just discern profound things from the scriptures, but was able to come to the right conclusion as a 20-year-old man. As a 20-year-old man, Fred Franz had all the answers about what was going to be happening as regards Bible prophecy and the last days and God's will for mankind. A 20-year-old Fred Franz had it all figured out. And I would submit that most 20-year-olds don't have it figured out. Most 20-year-olds are just escaping their teenage years and starting to find their feet as adults. And apparently Fred Franz was different. Fred Franz was this wise guru and sage at the tender age of 20. I don't quite buy it, but let's continue with what David wants to tell us.
There were other anointed ones who also saw the sign and understood its meaning. Joseph Rutherford, A.H. Macmillan.
Yes, A.H. Macmillan, who we've just read about and who thought he would be giving his last ever talk on earth in 1914.
W.E. Van Ambra.
Yes, the same W.E. Van Amberg who wrote the book The Way to Paradise, which basically prophesied that the likes of Moses and Samson and King David would all be resurrected around 1925 and would establish God's government in Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem would radio out instructions to the rest of the world and go on flying visits in aeroplanes to visit people around the world. This apparently is somebody who had it all figured out in 1914.
After 1914, others were anointed with Holy Spirit. These include such well-known brothers as Nathan Knorr, Lyman Swingle, Grant Suter, Milton Henschel, and George Genghis. They were anointed contemporaries of some in the first group. So really, these brothers make up part of the second group of the generation.
Whoa, okay, so now we have this idea that's cleverly been sneaked in. He's now asking us to believe that a generation can have a second group. A second group. Now, we've already established that in Matthew, when Jesus gave the prophecy, he said, this generation in the singular will not pass away. Now it's already two parts of a generation. No explanation, it's just been sneaked in.
Would you like an easy way to keep the generation straight? An easy way is to consider the situation of Brother Fred W. Franz. Now, you'll see that he's FWF on the chart. Now, as we said before, Brother Franz was born in 1893. He was baptized in November of 1913. So, as one of the Lord's anointed in 1914, he saw the sign and he understood what the sign meant. Now, Brother Franz lived a long life. He finished his earthly course at 99 years of age in 1992. Now, do you know of many who were of the anointed in 1914 and who outlived Brother Franz? There may have been some, but not many. Now, just for the sake of argument.
Okay, for the sake of argument, yes, go on.
Suppose that we assume that Brother Franz was the last of that first group of anointed ones. That is, the group of anointed ones who were anointed in 1914, who saw the sign, and then continued serving faithfully. Now, we're not saying Brother Franz was. We just don't know. But for the sake of argument, let's suppose.
Yes, I know what for the sake of argument means. Now, carry on.
In order to be part of this generation, someone would have had to have been anointed before 1992, because he would have to have been a contemporary of some of the first group. Now, again, we're not saying that Brother Franz was the last of this group, but we're just using this for the sake of argument as a point of reference.
Why do you have to tell us 3 times that this is for the sake of argument? Honestly, the man must think that we're all completely stupid.
Anyone anointed after 1992 would be of the anointed, but he would not be part of this generation. And Jesus said, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen.
I'm just going to interrupt here. Not that any of this makes sense, so I'm sure I'm not interrupting anything important. But you'll notice that video footage, which again is from the Watchtower film, which I would recommend everybody to watch. It's called The New World Society in Action. And if you put in the YouTube search, New World Society in Action, you'll find it quite easily. It's available to watch. But the fascinating thing is that you can watch the whole film shot in, I think, 1953, and not once does it mention the governing body. And in fact, in this clip here, you can see Nathan Knorr at his desk, because in those days, there was no governing body, there was just the president of the organization, and everybody had to do what the president wanted. So I just thought it was worth highlighting that point.
Someone might say, we know that some of the anointed will be on the earth when the Great Tribulation breaks out. But who's to say that Jehovah won't be anointing more people years from now? And then they'll be reading about us in some updated version of the Proclaimer's book.
I personally don't think there will be another updated version of the Proclaimer's book. I would be very surprised. I think there's likely to be a PDF version, a PDF only version of an updated version of the God's Kingdom Rules book. I would be very surprised if years from now the organisation is still printing books. But hey, let's just see whether I'm wrong.
Well, the answer is simple. Anyone anointed years from now would not have been a contemporary of those of the first group of anointed ones, because they have passed off the scene. And Jesus said, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen. They would not have been part of the generation.
So hopefully I've made it blatantly obvious what just happened there. David Splane, again, wants us to confuse the word generation with the word contemporary, so that they both mean the same thing. So that, so long as there is the slightest overlapping between one generation and another generation, then they can be considered the same generation. That is not how the word generation works. Generation, as I've just discussed, simply means people whose lives roughly correspond with each other. People who are born and who die at roughly the same time. That's what a generation means. You cannot add an extension onto a generation, because if you can add one extension onto a generation, who's to say you can't add a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth? The word generation loses its meaning if you can add extensions onto a generation, purely because there's a slight overlap in years between one generation and another generation. And just to drill this point home, those of you who are watching this video who are Jehovah's Witnesses will be familiar with the name Kerry Barber. Now, Kerry Barber was a member of the governing body, and he died in 2007 at the age of 101. Yes, he lived quite a full life. And I actually met briefly Kerry Barber when I visited Brooklyn Bethel in 2003, and I can remember it very vividly. I'd been invited along with my friends to go for lunch at Bethel, so I was there in the dining room, and I can remember Carrie Barber with his Zimmer frame and with a young Bethelite who was assigned to look after him. And the group of us who were visiting kind of all gathered round and had our photo taken with him. Yes, somewhere there is a photo of me and Carrie Barber together. I don't know where it is. I've tried searching for it, but the photo exists. That photo was taken in 2003. So Carrie Barber died 4 years later in 2007. But do I consider myself to be Carrie Barber's generation? Absolutely not. Carrie Barber was a completely different generation to my generation. Yes, our lives overlapped, and obviously he'd been alive for my entire life up to when I met him in 2003. We were contemporaries for, 27 years, let's say, up until the point of his death. But that doesn't mean I was part of Carrie Barber's generation. And anybody who says that I'm part of Carrie Barber's generation doesn't know what they're talking about. But what David Splane wants to do, and has been doing throughout his argumentation, is blur the lines between contemporary and generation, so that if someone is a contemporary of someone else for any number of years, that means they're part of the same generation. That is not the way the word generation works. That is not the definition of generation. But that's what David Splane wants you to buy into in order for this teaching to even begin to make sense.
Now, those of the second group of anointed ones are getting older. This is especially clear when you consider who make up the second group. We saw some pictures of those who made up the second group, but in addition, there are Carl Klein, John Barr, Albert Schroeder. All of the current members of the governing body are also part of this generation, and some of us are showing our age. So, brothers, we are indeed living deep in the time of the end. Now is no time for any of us to get weary. So let's all heed Jesus' counsel, the counsel found at Matthew 24:42. Keep on the watch, therefore, because you do not know on what day your Lord is coming.
So I found it interesting that when giving this kind of powerful summary to his overlapping generations explanation, David Splane needed to consult his notes. That doesn't, to me, sound like someone who is fully convinced of what he's saying or overly interested in impressing upon his viewers the importance of what he's saying. But I just wanted to pick up on something that David Splane said in those closing remarks about all of the current members of the governing body being part of the second generation. Hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. Yes, all of the governing body members are suitably old, apart from one, and that is Mark Sanderson, who is 50, having been born in 1965. Now, when Fred Franz died in 1992, remember, it's just for the sake of argument, but when Fred Franz died in 1992, Mark Sanderson would have been 27, which means that Mark Sanderson must have started taking the emblems, assuming he makes it into this second group of the generation. Mark Sanderson must have started taking the emblems in his 20s, at least by the age of 27, which was in 1992 when Fred Franz died. I'm not convinced that if a 27-year-old in most congregations started taking the emblems, that would be greeted with, oh, well, here's a man who really is chosen by Christ to reign in heaven. I think you'd need quite a lot of guts to start doing that and to be taken seriously. And only in later years, when the guy is in his 40s, 50s, I can imagine it would then be easier to swallow. But if you have a 27-year-old or younger in your congregation, who starts taking the emblems, I can imagine that being greeted with, who on earth does this guy think he is? Because of these sorts of phenomena, we are asked to drop everything and accept as credible such ridiculous teachings as the newly reworked generation teaching, which I can tell you is responsible for a lot of people leaving. I'm going to be perfectly honest, the overlapping generation teaching came out in, let me think, it would have been 2010, when I was just about waking up in 2010, and I can't remember it being that big a deal. Frankly, I just didn't want to think about it. I knew it didn't make sense, but I just didn't want to think about it too much. But I've heard from lots of people who say, no, this was what woke me up. When they came out with this outrageous teaching, which made no sense whatsoever, that was what finally did it for me and made me realise this is just all a load of nonsense. They're just moving the goalposts, changing the rules as they go along. I'm having nothing more to do with it. And I can only hope that for some who are watching this episode, the penny will now drop and you'll realise that if you previously couldn't understand the overlapping generation, it's not your fault. The reason why you don't understand the overlapping generation teaching is because it doesn't make sense and relies on total credulity, total ignorance, total willingness to suspend critical thought, and a willingness to embrace alternative definitions of words. You cannot merge the word contemporary with generation. They're two different words. Just because someone is a contemporary of someone in a different generation doesn't mean those two generations can be merged together. And if you can merge together two generations, you can also merge, why not 3, 4, 5, on into infinity? The word generation loses its meaning. So I hope that has roughly debunked the whole overlapping generation teaching, because goodness knows I don't want to have to do countless videos on this subject. And let's move on with the rest of the video.
Lake Nicaragua is the largest freshwater lake in all of Central America. Here you will see stunning natural beauty and a fisherman or two. But perhaps most important of all are those who are fishing for men.
Am I the only one who now finds the whole concept of fishers of men rather weird and creepy? And I really don't want to offend any Christians. I've probably done that way too much already, but yeah, the whole concept of treating men as though they're fish and feeling as though you need to go and catch people, as though they're kind of a commodity, and accrue people to your way of thinking as though you're catching fish. I just find it extremely crude and primitive, and if you want to convince people of your way of thinking, then it needs to be part of a dialogue, and you're not going to convince everyone because everyone's got different views on things. But to just assume that people are something that you can go out and catch, I just find it extremely objectionable and inappropriate, and I'm glad that I no longer have to try and excuse that sort of language.
A lot of the challenges have to do with the cost, because it costs to run the boat.
We had to be very well organized to plan out our day.
Sometimes you will go a whole morning and maybe only talk to 2 people.
So it's pretty much like preaching anywhere in the world then.
Sometimes, when they would come to study with us, well, we didn't want to, and we would tell them that we weren't going to study.
Now that I can understand.
My husband and I have benefited from being here together because we've learned to work as a team. It feels good to know that we spent our years where we were able to use our energy and all of our efforts to really be useful.
And isn't that exactly how Watchtower wants most young people to spend their lives, including married couples, to spend the years when they have as many options as possible to confine themselves to doing work that benefits them, work that promotes the cult, work that gets propaganda into people's hands. Never mind that these people could be making something of their lives. We want them to be working for us, going round on these pointless evangelical tours and roping people into our cult.
Thanks to Jehovah and to the island preaching work, my sons are baptized and my husband is an unbaptized publisher.
Jehovah is real to them now. And I often think of the scripture in Haggai 2:7 that says that these are the desirable things of the nations, the precious things, and they are very precious to us.
Precious!
But suddenly, things changed. In January 2010, our family attended a district convention, and that was very special for me. It was so different from what I was used to. The brothers came and welcomed me and treated me so kindly. It was just amazing. I could hardly believe it. And the music they had, that was what touched my heart. I liked it so much. That was something I never forgot in all my life.
This guy must have had some really bad music in Mexico if it was the music at a meeting at a convention that impressed him. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact that what really kind of sealed the deal and got him involved in the organisation was not whether it was true or not. Oh no. It was the fact that he was love bombed, the fact that he was completely showered with affection and a feeling of belonging when he went to this meeting. And another emotional aspect was the music. Well, I liked the music. The music made me feel good. The music felt special. The music was very stirring. Those aren't reasons to join a religion.
It would have been good to attend every meeting, but since I work far away, I could not. I could only attend the meetings on Sundays. So I decided to ask my boss if he could give me a different job. But that didn't work. He didn't want to make the change. So I waited for a little while. I thought I would try asking again. This time I asked him if I could attend the meeting in a congregation that was near my work. But he didn't want to let me do that either. And there was something else. He wanted to give me a large bonus if I would work for him until the end of the year. But I thought to myself, if I go on working, what will this show regarding my decision making? If Jehovah's Day comes, what do I show as more important for me? Jehovah or my work? And so the decision was made. After I resigned my work, I brought all my things home and I felt free, relieved.
So again, we have this idea that if you're in a job and your job doesn't allow you to attend every meeting, then you should leave, you should resign. And we've already had, I can't remember which one, but we had in a previous JW Broadcasting episode, a fictionalized drama in which a husband with children, a guy who's got a job and responsible for caring for his family, still quits his job just because his job won't allow him to go to all the meetings. And I just think it's shameful, shameful stuff that these governing body members who live such an insulated life in Brooklyn can be ordering people who live in the real world, who have real financial consequences if they don't provide for themselves and for their family. They're ordering people in those situations to risk everything, to put everything on the line and compromise their employment for the sake of attending these indoctrination sessions. And we've just seen another example.
Soon afterwards, I was able to serve as a regular pioneer and even be appointed as a ministerial servant. But Jehovah's blessing didn't stop there. The privilege I now have, working as a translator on the Low German translation team. It's the best work I can imagine. It helps more people to come to know Jehovah.
The best work that he can imagine. I would suggest that he can't imagine much if the best work in the world is being a translator for a cult, translating cult propaganda for a living. No, I can't see that as being an appealing job for me personally. But it's interesting how the organisation on the one hand, demeans people and makes them feel, stupid, talks down to them, but on the other hand, tries to get them to buy into this extremely egotistical view that the creator of the universe is doing things specifically for them and giving them blessings, giving them appointments, giving them job opportunities. And we'll see it again in this broadcast, an example of someone saying, oh, well, this isn't just a coincidence, this has come directly from God. The God of the universe has put all of the disasters, all of the human calamities, all of the tragedies, all of the children dying and washing up on beaches. No, what he's interested in is what job I do for the organisation and making sure I get different privileges and responsibilities. I just find it very disturbing that religion is capable of making people feel so self-important that when they have an opportunity, it's not just a coincidence or even a product of their own hard work and effort. No, this is actually something that's been given to you by the creator of the cosmos.
I play theocratic music when I'm alone at home, also when I'm with my family, and sometimes during our family worship. We also sing theocratic songs when gathering with brothers and sisters.
I think there are two types of Jehovah's Witness. There is the Jehovah's Witness who can just about stomach theocratic music when he goes to the meetings and to the conventions and assemblies. And maybe even get a kick out of it on occasion, because there can be some quite stirring pieces. There's that kind of Jehovah's Witness. And then there's the Jehovah's Witness who thinks, actually, I'm not hearing enough of this music. I also need to hear it, not just at the meetings, not just at the assemblies and conventions, but when I'm alone at home and with my family, I need to have it on in the background. I absolutely must have it. Because otherwise, I must be disappointing God, and it's just so beautiful. And why not have it on in the car stereo? I actually, Deanna and I, we're not going to name names, but we were once invited to go on like a road trip for a weekend to visit some friends in Bosnia, and the couple who took us were special pioneers, and lovely couple, really nice couple. I do think highly of them. But in the car, on the way there and on the way back, on the stereo, they had not the orchestral Kingdom melodies, that would have been at least a bit tolerable, but the actual piano music that you sing to when you go to the meetings. And it was, I think, it must have been a 3 or 4 hour drive there and back, in the back of the car, listening to this piano music from the Kingdom Hall. I think it takes a very special kind of Jehovah's Witness to be that enthralled with the music, to want to listen to it even in those circumstances. Two things: call me uncultured, but that to me is the lamest instrument I've ever seen in my life. It doesn't, he looks like he's playing it, but it's just percussion. There's no tune to it, there's nothing kind of in any way melodic about it. It's just a strumming noise. So I don't understand that instrument. Maybe he's playing it wrong, maybe he's playing it right, maybe again I'm just completely uncultured. And the other thing is, have you noticed how there's always one brother who has to gesture when there's Kingdom melodies being sung? Well, I need to employ my gestures. This is precisely the moment to enforce the words with my hands as I'm singing.
The emotions really play a huge role in singing. Being able to sing with emotion brings the meaning of the song.
Being able to sing with emotion brings the meaning of the song. I would challenge anyone to watch that clip again and point to an obvious example of emotion. All of the singers in just that clip just now look almost completely emotionless, and yet that's supposed to be emotional singing.
Playing kingdom songs gives me a feeling that I have achieved the purpose of learning music. I don't get this peace and joy when I play any other song.
Playing kingdom songs is the whole purpose of music itself. Music was invented for singing kingdom songs. How can you exaggerate more than that?
Brother Rutherford had broadcast in Philadelphia from the Opera House about 1921, and he and other elders decided that this was Jehovah's provision. Radio was Jehovah's provision to get this truth spread out. There was no way for a couple hundred witnesses to witness to the millions and millions of people in the metropolitan area, let alone the world.
I just wanted to pick up on this point because here it references Rutherford and the fact that he thought that radio was a provision from Jehovah, and probably if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this part of the video, you just shrug it off and think, well, they were that's a perfectly reasonable conclusion to come to. But one thing you notice when you read Rutherford's books, and I now have, I'm pleased to say, thanks to my very generous viewers and readers on JW Survey, I now have every single book that Rutherford wrote. I have the Rutherford Rainbow. I don't have Millions Now Living Will Never Die, which wasn't really a book, it was more of an essay. But I do have all his books, and one of those books is the book Government, which he published in, I think, 1928. Let me just check that. 1928. And I wanted to read to you about what Rutherford has to say about radio, because it just expands a little bit on what we've just heard from the JW Broadcasting episode. Rutherford writes, "It is since 1918 that the Lord has brought into action the radio, for which he provided from the foundation of the earth. By means of the radio, the good news of the kingdom has been heralded throughout the nations of the earth. Selfish interests under the control of Satan use the radio, to be sure. These same selfish interests endeavour to prevent the use of the radio for a wide proclamation of the truth. Jehovah will permit just such use of it as he desires. He could prevent the enemy from interfering, but he does not, and he has good reason for so doing. In his own good way, he so arranged that on July 24, 1927, the greatest chain of radio stations till then was linked together and used in giving proclamation to the message of good news concerning his righteous government. At that time, the evils of Satan's oppressive government were brought before the people in contrast with God's righteous government and the blessings to flow therefrom." And this is a repeated theme in Rutherford's books, because he had a major beef with the authorities, the radio authorities in America at that time, and the fact that they basically eventually drove Watchtower and him off the air. And in almost all of his books, he has something to say about the radio being a provision from God, and he even quotes scripture in some of his books. Those scriptures are talking about lightnings flashing forth. He believed that was describing radio. So these, in my submission, are not the views of a sane, balanced person, suggesting that rather than being, just something that's always been around, and we've only just discovered it in the last 100 years or so. No, radio is actually a provision from Jehovah for the exclusive use of his servants, and that was what Rutherford believed, and it's alluded to here, but it's worth just emphasizing a little bit more, I think.
Life is kind of lonely right now. All of my friends got married and seem so happy. What if I never find someone? invited me for a gathering. That's nice. Actually, I don't feel comfortable at gatherings.
I'm so lonely. I wish I could find someone. Everyone else is happy, but not me. Nobody will be my friend. Everybody is happy except me. Oh, hang on. Hello? Oh, Taylor, hi. You want me to come to a gathering? Yeah, well, you know what? You can get stuffed. Leave me alone. I'm so lonely. No one wants to be my friend.
Mark has given me lots of attention lately. He really appreciates me. And actually, he's kind of cute. But he's not a brother. I really want to be obedient to Jehovah.
He's not a brother! It's worth talking about this. It's worth talking about this because this is one of those scriptures that gets repeatedly hauled out, especially at assemblies, as I recall. The scripture about not becoming unevenly yoked. And amazingly, this is not a disfellowshipping offence, even though it's explicitly mentioned in the Bible. Do not become unevenly yoked with unbelievers. You're not allowed to marry someone who doesn't believe what you believe. Apparently, smoking is a disfellowshipping offence. Becoming a professional boxer is a disfellowshipping offence. But something that's expressly mentioned in the Bible isn't a disfellowshipping offence, and that's getting married to someone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. So I don't know how you would explain that, but I just thought it was worth highlighting here that Taylor's problem with this guy at work is nothing other than the fact that he's not a witness. The fact that he's showing her attention is not a bad thing. You know, it would be a bad thing if you married someone who didn't show you attention. Yes, I'm sure that in life there are people who are going to take a romantic interest in others who aren't desirable, but there's also going to be people who do meet together through work who are perfect for each other. And what we have here is propaganda designed to induce fear into single witnesses, that if anyone shows a romantic interest to them other than a witness, then their motives must be insincere. Their motives must be to take advantage of you. And I'm sorry, but that is not the case. Yes, there will always be bad people in life who do want to take advantage of you. But whether that is the case or not does not hinge on what their religious beliefs are. It could just be that they're a nice person and they want to be with you.
Taylor met her husband on the internet. They seem to be very happy. So what's the harm in finding a brother that way? Would it really be bad to have a quick look at one of those JW dating sites? Oh, it's Julia.
Yes, JW dating sites. Now get a mention on JW Broadcasting. And what can I say? Again, I'm sure that there are shady people on JW dating sites, just as there are shady people, you know, anywhere on the internet. But the fact that they're on the JW dating site doesn't mean that they are automatically a shady person. It could just be a Jehovah's Witness who's lonely, who doesn't necessarily want to be confined in choice to just the Jehovah's Witnesses who happen to be in their tiny congregation out in the middle of nowhere, but who just genuinely want to meet someone other than the people they've grown up with. And here you have another door being closed by a watchtower. Oh, well, we don't want witnesses going on JW dating sites. That's not to say I endorse JW dating sites, but that's for different reasons. I do think it's very, very sad the way that people who grow up as Jehovah's Witnesses, who are already confined to only be allowed to choose from other Jehovah's Witnesses, are then further confined, and it's a case of, oh, well, you can only meet someone so long as it's not on a JW dating site. And I'm sure that there will be people as well who will extrapolate from this that meeting someone on the internet is also a bad thing. So, few red flags here.
How thoughtful of her to invite me for family worship. Should I join them? Oh well, why not?
So she doesn't want to go to a gathering, but she does want to go to some other family's child indoctrination session.
I cannot believe it even crossed my mind to date a non-witness or even look at those JW dating sites and put my integrity at stake. Imagine what I could have gotten myself into. I'm so happy Julia invited me.
Okay, we need to look at this. This fictitious sister says, I can't believe it even crossed my mind to go on a JW dating site or to go out with someone who's not a witness. So now we have the concept of thought crime. It was wrong for her to even think about it. Never mind the fact that she didn't do it. Watchtower wants young Jehovah's Witnesses in this situation to know that it's wrong to even think about it. So if you're thinking about going on a JW dating site, or you're thinking that you quite like the attention you're getting from someone who's not a witness, guess what? You've already sinned. And this is one of the concepts that I would argue is inherent to religion. The idea that you can do something wrong just by thinking it. And thought crime, for anyone who's read George Orwell's 1984, goes hand in hand with totalitarianism. It's a way of controlling people. If you are part of a regime that is telling you not just what to do, but what to think, then you're on dangerous ground.
My singleness indeed allows me to serve Jehovah without distraction. I just love my life. An invitation to the School for Kingdom Evangelizers. Yes, Jehovah really did not hold back anything good from me.
So this goes back to what I was talking about before with the young chap in Mexico who ended up being a translator for Low German for the organisation. This idea that if you get an assignment, it's not just come from Watchtower, it's not just come from the governing body, it's not just come from your elders. No, it's come from Jehovah. Jehovah himself has seen to it, amidst all of the things he needs to worry about, of pressing concern is the fact that you're able to go to a cult seminar on becoming an evangelizer. That's what he really is interested in. So again, it's just this egotism and frankly narcissism that is intrinsic in religion. And it's rather ironic because in Christianity you have the concept of being modest and humble and lowly, but conflicting with that is this idea that if something happens, it's because God has given it to you. God has put everything else on hold and made sure that you get what it is you've been asking for. So two conflicting ideas really, but it's very interesting that Watchtower wants young people to feel that when they are given a duty, a job to fulfill by the organisation, it's not just come as a result of coincidence, it's not just come because the organisation needs people to promote it. No, it's come from heaven.
Progress from there till our baptism. And she said, I am ready to get baptized. And so I said, well, I'm ready too. So we got baptized together.
So basically, he got baptized because his wife was getting baptized. Again, not the best reason to join a religion.
I was baptized at 71 years of age. Sometimes I'd go to the convention and I'd look around and I'd see how many Native Americans I could pinpoint, and there wasn't very many. And I happened to tell Brother Dave that, hey, I'm not seeing too many Native Americans, I'm looking. And he said, well, you'd better get busy and start teaching some. And he's right. This day, if I can reach a Native American, then that's what I want to do, or anybody else. Or that.
So this Native American chap, bless him, he looks really, really nice guy, joins the witnesses at the age of 71, notices in the crowd that he's pretty much the only one there who's Native American, and the guy who's studied with him jokes with him and says, well, that's your fault. It's your job to bring in more Native Americans now that you've been baptized at the age of 71.
I have a special feeling for the Algonquin Community Cemetery down here because I'm looking at the names and all that. I realize that my mother and father are both buried there. The biggest hope now, and Dave and Kim really explained it well to me, that you're going to see him again. That's the big hope.
So Dave and Kim lied to this man in order to get him baptized. They told him, and bearing in mind as well the age he got baptized, he's 71 years old when he got baptized, and he was baptized having been promised that he would see his parents again, which for me is just cruel. It's cruel to dangle that carrot in front of people and say, join our cult and you'll get to see your loved ones again. It's called hijacking the grieving process. It's exploiting emotional trauma, emotional heartache, and using it to benefit a cult.
Christian neutrality brought increased mob actions against Jehovah's Witnesses. On June 14, 1940, Flag Day, a group of men approached Kingdom Farm. David Abule recalls,
"We were put wise by an old fella who would pass by on his way to buy his whiskey, to a plan by the townspeople to burn down all our buildings and wreck our machinery."
John Bogard remembers what happened next.
About 6 o'clock in the evening, the gang started to gather, one car after another, until there were 30 or 40 carloads. But the presence of the police kept them on the highway.
The witnesses were determined to stay on the property and wait it out. Late in the night, a frustrated mob finally disbanded.
What's interesting here is that, yes, you have Jehovah's Witnesses being persecuted, and don't Jehovah's Witnesses just love a good persecution story? Because, after all, being persecuted means that you're God's organization. But what was interesting here was that the saviors in this story were not the witnesses, they were the police. So the townspeople all gathered together to do damage to Watchtower property. You've got the witnesses waiting it out, which I take means cowering in fear behind boxes somewhere. And the police are the ones who intervene. So Satan's system, Satan's authorities intervene to prevent, to uphold law and order, and to prevent people from disrupting the witnesses' work. I don't understand what the story is here, other than the fact that there's nothing special about Jehovah's Witnesses, and there is no grand conspiracy by Satan's system of things to stop their preaching work.
Something that helped me was a conversation I had with a circuit overseer, where he encouraged me to learn a new language so that I could help others learn about Jehovah in their mother tongue.
And just on this point, I would strongly recommend, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, please, please, please go to learn another language, because I know when I never kind of really set out to learn Croatian. I just moved to Croatia, and the understanding was that I would, learn Croatian and try to expand my ministry in Croatia. But what happened was, for the brief period, well, I wouldn't say it was a brief period, because in many ways it's ongoing, but I was suddenly deposited into a situation where I couldn't understand what was being said at meetings, and the constant flow of propaganda was literally unplugged. It was like pulling the plug out of the socket. I couldn't make sense of anything anymore when I went to the meetings. And it was this brief episode that enabled me to start thinking, hang on, what do I really believe? And I've heard similar stories as well from other people who, not necessarily of, we just couldn't understand anymore, but there's one very interesting story. If you Google Amber Scorer, type in JW survey Amber Scorer and you'll get through to my article on it, and that has a link to her full story. But Amber went to learn Chinese and went to work where the need is great, undercover in China, because obviously the work's under ban in China. And it was only when she started having to describe witness beliefs in Chinese and finding words to express these outrageous teachings in a language where things are quite literal and you have to kind of put things as bluntly as possible, and seeing the looks on people's faces as she was saying these things, that was what helped her in waking up. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, then yes, please do learn another language, or at least try to learn another language and see what happens.
I have seen how Jehovah has used me as an instrument to share the message with other people.
Jehovah has used her as an instrument to share the message. Again, we're substituting the word Jehovah for Watchtower, so there's no longer any need to explain why Watchtower is Jehovah's organization. If Watchtower gives someone an assignment, then it's Jehovah giving someone an assignment. And if Watchtower uses someone, then it's Jehovah using someone. And this young lady is extremely proud of the fact that she is literally being used by a cult.
I have no words to explain my gratitude to Jehovah for having used me, and truly, it's something that we can only experience if we give our best to Jehovah.
So you need to give yourself to Watchtower, you need to be used by Watchtower, and you need to give your very best to Watchtower. So again, this idea of sacrifice, it's not just enough to be willing to serve, you need to give your all, and it's on a no pain, no gain basis. If it doesn't hurt, then you're doing something wrong. You need to give absolutely everything to the point of putting your future prosperity on hold and just hope that everything's going to work out in the end.
Living close to the end means we are preaching in very exciting times, but at 2 Timothy 3:1, the Bible calls these critical times, hard to deal with. That's true not just for us as Jehovah's Witnesses, but also for everyone we meet in our ministry and daily life.
Yes, these are critical times apparently. We're living on the cusp of Armageddon, and the world has never been a worse place to be. And I don't know whether I've said it before, but to debunk this argument, all you need to say is, well, would you rather be living in 1914 or now? And no person in their right mind would say, I'd actually rather be living in 1914 because things are just unbearable nowadays.
This world is unforgiving, full of coldness and despair. Many hopes are disappointed by a world that doesn't care. And we see it in their faces as they pass us on the street.
The world is unforgiving, full of coldness and despair and hopelessness. Isn't everything dreadful? You know, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just bring on Armageddon now and be done with it and have everything in rubble? That would be better than what we have now. That's the message. That's the apocalyptic doomsday message of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're so proud of it they've decided to put it in this song.
At times we feel downhearted when no one seems to care about the hope we offer or the message that we bear. For some hearts are just too hardened to receive the kingdom seed. But could it be a friendly smile is what they really need? Just a smile.
Again, we have a not so thinly veiled insult for anyone watching this who is not a Jehovah's Witness or has never been a Jehovah's Witness. We've already had it suggested that if you don't understand that the last days began in 1914, you're just a child. You're a naive child. What do you know? And now we're being told that if you don't want to speak to Jehovah's Witnesses, if you reject their message, you're being hard-hearted. How stubborn of you. Why can't you accept this wonderful offer that we're giving you of this dystopia in which you're going to live on a paradise earth with billions of corpses buried beneath the lawn.
Just a smile can help us make a start when you've done your best, praying you'll succeed.
This is another sickening aspect of this this propaganda song, is the fact that you have this kid who is depicted witnessing to her teacher. And, you know, I can remember from when I was growing up as a witness, the message was that when you go to school, you're not just going to be educated, you're going to your personal territory. So your school is your personal territory that no one else can reach but you. And you have the duty, the obligation, on pain of being destroyed if you don't fulfill it. You have the duty to witness, not just to your classmates, but to your teacher as well, if you get the opportunity, as we've seen in this video. And again, more contempt for children, for the potential that they have to learn, and telling children that when you go to school, you're not just going to learn, you're going to evangelize to people. You're going to be a fisher of your classmates, a fisher of your teacher. You're going to rope people in to what you believe based on what your parents have told you. No one else can see the red flags here. Then something very disturbing is going on.
I like that song. Bob, I think it's going to inspire me to smile more when I preach, and maybe at other times as well. Bob, I want to thank you so much for sharing those motivating experiences of the brothers and sisters who have kept the faith in the past and who are keeping on the watch today. It was truly inspiring.
It has been a pleasure, David. 2 Pioneer Sisters conduct close to 20 Bible studies and hold regular meetings with periodic visits from brothers to give public talks and encouragement.
Well, our Christian love and greetings go back to them. And as for you, we've said it before, but we're going to say it again. We love you all very, very much. Thank you for joining us. This is JW Broadcasting in Brooklyn, New York.
Wow, I think that is possibly the most spectacularly phony ending to a JW Broadcasting episode that there has been in the year since these videos started. You have David Splane, a governing body member, trying to look sincere when speaking to his co-host while reading from his notes. So a little lesson for you here, David, if you're watching. It's impossible to look sincere while looking at your notes. If you really feel grateful to someone and you really want to express appreciation to someone, you're not reading your notes as you're saying it, because otherwise it looks scripted and it looks fake. And it looks contrived, and you looked all of those things when you were thanking your co-host, and you looked phony as well when you were telling everybody, including me, because you didn't say it was just Jehovah's Witnesses. You told everybody how much you love them. I wasn't buying it, to be honest. It looked very fake, very cheesy, very contrived, not at all believable. And I'm thrilled because, you know, apparently Watchtower thinks that's the standard that they need to operate at. The producer behind these videos is happy with that kind of standard, and that tells me that there will be more phoniness and more cheesiness to come. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching these videos, please, please, please look me in the eyes and tell me you're proud when you watch moments like that, when your leaders show how superficial everything is. So those are my observations on the September JW Broadcasting. We're actually now in October. Today is October the 1st. I'll try and get this video out over the next 24 to 48 hours, but I am a bit behind at the moment with my video projects. The next thing I'm going to be doing is working, really putting myself into the JW Survey Day video, which is a montage of different ex-Jehovah's Witnesses talking about what it's like to wake up and realize that there is no there is no Jehovah's organisation, and understanding the happiness that comes from finding the freedom to start questioning things. So I think everyone will enjoy that video. I'm enjoying just editing it and putting all the pieces together, so I'm sure the finished product will be something exciting, or at least I'll try to make sure it's exciting for you. And yeah, that's just about it. So until next time, thank you for watching.